Good morning, I'm Sam Candy. I am the CEO of Responsible Futures. We are an organisation that educates, guides and inspires people and companies to be more sustainable and socially responsible through our webinars, training and consulting. Welcome to our webinar, Why Sustainable Packaging and the Circular Economy Matters, in partnership with our friends at Acopia. It's thanks to them that we're able to run this webinar for free for the audience. So before we introduce our panelists, I'm going to hand over to Terry from Acopia to introduce himself and the webinar and set the scene.
Thanks, Sam. My name is Terry Gardner from Acopia, and I'm the account director for the retail side of our business. And we focus on largely goods not for resale, which obviously includes packaging as a large part of that. And our focus is clearly on sustainability and making a real impact for businesses. And just going on to the webinar and the reason behind this, why sustainable packaging and the circular economy matters, it's clear that as consumers are becoming more and more aware of the environment, that they're choosing to make more sustainable choices, and it's clear that they're more likely to buy and, more importantly, spend more money with retailers and businesses who use or champion sustainable products and packaging. It's of utmost importance that businesses seek out and identify more sustainable packaging and circular economy solutions. So I'm looking forward to hearing more about that later. We know that using sustainable packaging can reduce the negative impact of packaging materials, but it's not always easy to identify what's good and what's bad. So, in fact, there's clearly different choices for different types of businesses, which is what makes it challenging, particularly when we're talking broadly about sustainable packaging. Packaging materials such as plastic, paper, glass, they're all essential for protecting and transporting products safely, but they can also have a significant environmental consequence if they're not managed properly. Switching to sustainable packaging can also reduce waste, and we'll talk more about that later. We've all seen David Attenborough's films and know the impact of unsustainable packaging and products on the environment, and that's why it's so important that we align our brand and protect our brands by making the right choices. The big question in everybody's mind, and one we'll certainly try to uncover today, is just what is the right choice for business. I'm looking forward to hearing more about how we can optimise our resources, reduce consumption of raw materials and recovering waste to be repurposed, so we can understand what is the right choice. And the circular economy will undoubtedly play a large part in this. Using recycled materials in packaging is a way to reduce carbon footprint, and overall sustainable packaging is important to address the huge global challenges of climate change, biodiversity loss and pollution. So at Acopia, we're really pleased to be part of this event, not just because we're the greenest company on earth, we're not because we have all the answers, we don't, but because we know that by making the right choices, we can start to make a real impact on our environment. And please feel free to connect with me directly on LinkedIn. I think one of my colleagues is going to pop my LinkedIn details into the chat box. We're about to also release a sustainability and retail e-guide, which I'm more than happy to make available to any of the attendees. Even if you've opted out on receiving further information, please reach out to me directly, and we're really glad to pass that on. Back over to you, Sam. That's it from me for now.
Thank you. Thanks, Terry. Thanks for that. And I'll make sure in the follow-up that I share that link to the e-guide as well. So let's go round our panel, wonderful panel of experts, and hear a bit about them and your involvement in sustainable packaging and the circular economy. Louise, let's start with you.
Hi, everyone.
We do. Can I just say, if anyone's got any questions, can you put them in the Q&A? I'll keep an eye on that. So if throughout the webinar, if you have any questions, we'll try and get them answered, but we have got a lot to get through. Sorry, Louise, go on, introduce.
Thanks, Sam. Hi, everyone. So my name's Lou Stevens. I am an independent sustainability consultant, and I work with a real nice variety of brands, helping them on their sustainability strategy, their communications, and then the implementation of all the actions they need to do to become more sustainable in the round. I really built my career at Innocent Drinks. I was there for 19 years. So I joined when they were a tiny startup that absolutely no one had even heard of smoothies, let alone Innocent Drinks, and left at the point that they were a multinational billion-dollar B Corp. So incredible experience, including a fair chunk of time as head of sustainability, which involved working really closely on our sustainable packaging strategy and the implementation of some of our exciting packaging innovations. It's great to be here today.
Thank you. We look forward to hearing more of your expertise. Sam, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Sam. So good morning, everyone. I'm Sam Hyde-Hart, and before starting my own business, I worked for 12 years across the food safety and packaging technology for the industry's leading brands and manufacturers, such as Mars, Innocent, Pret-a-Manger, and M&S. Now I'm the founder of Hyde-Hart Consulting, a team of highly skilled consultants bringing with them more than 100 years of experience from every corner of the food industry. We help brands grow safely and sustainably, experts in all things food safety and packaging, so you don't have to be. Our clients have included the likes of Ottolenghi Group, Bowl Foods, Hain Daniels, Linda McCartney range, and also Dalesford Organic, who pride themselves on having very sustainable packaging. A good example of what we do is more recently the launch of Bowl Foods' award-winning Power Shakes range, hot-filled into reusable and fully recyclable UK glass, maximizing shelf life of the product and reducing waste. So it's good to be here, good to be part of the conversation and to take part in the debate. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Sam. And Carol, last but not least.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Carol. My sustainability credentials are not as profound as my colleagues, but let me tell you a little bit about myself and why I'm here today. I worked with the Arcadia Group. I was the retail director for Wallace and Evans, and whilst at Arcadia, I was the retail board member across all the brands, Topshop, Topman, DPs. There was 8 brands in total. I was the retail board member for sustainability. When Arcadia, all the Arcadia brands were sold off, I discovered the charity environment, which I love, the third sector, and it was so closely aligned to sustainability, credentials, recycling, that I decided to take a course with last summer with the Cambridge University, and took a course in sustainable leadership. And since that period of time, I've started to work with companies, particularly on the educational piece around what sustainability really is. And in that networking process and charity process, I came across Terry from Acopia, and I've become very close to that brand. And we're just putting together an initiative to go to market on sustainable products. So that's my background. That's why I'm here.
Oh, it's good to have you here. Right, we're talking about the circular economy, sustainable packaging. Louise, let's start with you. Tell us a bit more about what we mean by the circular economy.
Yeah, it's a big term, and it's one that it's something I learned about in my master's degree 15 years ago, and it felt really dry and like something out of a textbook, which it literally was, to something that's now being talked about daily and can be interpreted in a number of ways. And I know that Sam will have an equally eloquent, or probably more eloquent way of putting it, but the way I see it is we have many finite resources on Earth, and also of the ones that are allegedly infinite, they're in pretty poor shape. So the goal of a circular economy is to put more value on those resources and ultimately to be significantly less wasteful. So it's about taking a step back and looking at that traditional model of capitalism, which is a linear economy. Basically, it's a straight line from just taking from the earth making it into something, selling it, and then just throwing away what comes out the other end. So that's where we've been for a really long time, and it cannot sustain. So a circular model is more around making, using, and then reusing or recycling so that you can make again. So that's that loop. And so that very first input could be very varied. It could be renewable in some way, but it's ideally going to take some feedstock that comes from the waste at the end of that loop.
Thank you. Sam, do you want to give your take on it as well?
Yeah, thanks, Lou. That's a great start to it. So I see it from my point of view, it's a way of thinking about the value materials have and the investment of natural resources that went into their creation, and reducing it, preserving it, sharing it, sometimes topping it up, and most importantly, making it available to be reinvested, like Lou said. For example, something I find really contradictory to this model are disposable vapes. Semiconductors, circuit boards, batteries, liquid flavorings, plastic moldings, precious metals, shipped across the world to be sold at Tesco for $2.99 and chucked in a bush. Remarkably, the leading brand of this, Views, claims to be carbon neutral by offsetting their emissions through reforestation programs in South America, and to have plastic-free packaging. You know, what am I missing here? Why is this? Why are they pitching themselves as a sustainable brand? When you look at the damage that kind of a product is doing, it doesn't value the materials which are in it. It's completely linear. It's not circular. So that should help to kind of contextualize what the circular economy should be.
Thank you. It's almost like when you share points like that, it almost becomes a bit greenwashy, I think. But okay, like we're going to go over to the other side, sustainable packaging. Terry, what do you see as sustainable packaging?
Well, it's an incredibly broad subject, isn't it? And you know, when I was thinking about this question, you know, we talk about it all day, every day, and I really wondered how to kind of, you know, bring it out to explain what sustainable packaging is. But I think, in simple terms, you need to start thinking about it in terms of the reduce, reuse, recycle analogy that's so widely used, and I'm coining a phrase that everybody uses. Then it's important that we break the conversation down. As a business, we focus on 3 core pillars, and I think that's really important to expose that we need to be firstly looking at the source of products. We secondly need to be looking at the use of products, and thirdly, we need to consider the end of life and the circularity of products, which is already been talked about a little bit already. So when we look at the source of the products, I think it's important that we, you know, it's important even we've seen from the news this week with large brands, you know, not necessarily brand packaging, but, you know, looking at the ethical and making sure that they're using ethically sound processes at the source of their products, make sure that people are being treated fairly, and you know, make sure it's socially sound sources, and of course it includes the raw materials as well. It's not just about the people, it's about the raw materials, and considering where these items come from and how they're made. And then secondly, of course, you've got the use of products. You've got you know, it's clear that many brands are doing an extreme amount of work on thinking about how they're packaging products, both from a primary and secondary perspective. You know, I'm talking about reducing plastics, and you know, I was thinking about, you know, simple terms, you know, what you get drink cans in and baked bean cans in, and people are looking at all of those things. But I think it's broader than that. It's you've got to consider everything in terms of the use of the product. It's simply imperative that we look at every piece of the packaging we're using, and you know, going back to what Sam said earlier, it's super important that we are not greenwashing people through. I think it's clear that the consumer is becoming so much more conscious of what we're doing. As I said at the beginning, our future customers are going to be more conscious about where they buy and where they spend their money. The consumer is, and so brands are becoming hyper aware that this is the right thing to be doing. And of course, it's about our brand alignment with these products as well and solutions, and making sure that talked a bit at the beginning about David Attenborough and the Blue Ocean, and aligning, not having our brands aligned with poor packaging. And then finally, the considering the end of life, there's a lot of misinformation around the end of life of products, compostable products. A lot of people are talking about compostable products, but actually it's largely unknown that unless you take those products to an industrial facility, it's not possible to decompose them, and unless you specify home compostable based material. And it's not exactly about turning this into a political debate, but I think we also need to look at how our local authorities need to do more, and the government needs to do more to make it possible for people to adopt and accept more sustainable packaging, ways of packaging. I'm sure the other panelists will have a view on this too, but I saw a piece last week in Australia about soft plastic recycling end of life, and 2 major brands in Australia have been ordered by the government to dump more than 5,200 tonnes of soft plastic because of a failed recycling scheme. So we all need to be doing more. I was in Sainsbury's this week and I saw a plastic recycling bin just overflowing. So clearly the consumer wants to do more, and I think we all have to do more from business perspective to make it possible to adopt these things. I'm sorry, that's a bit of a ramble, but I'm sure the other panelists will have more to say on that too.
Yeah, no, that's great, and thanks for your description there. We're talking about the importance of the circular economy, sustainable packaging. Why are we here? Why is it so important? Sam, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, certainly. Thank you. So in my view, it retains the way we think about materials, retrains the way we think about materials from being infinite, cheap, disposable or single use to recognizing their true value and the effect that our use of them has on the planet. So designing consumer goods with this in mind should reduce waste, increase quality, extend lifespan or shelf life, if we're talking about food and drink, and make more things available to a growing population requiring less input to create them. Looking at the bigger picture, nature's resources have been extracted and abused for far too long, and significant change is required right across the industry to protect and rebalance what is left. For example, it is widely accepted that the fertility of topsoil has declined so much that an estimated 60 harvests remain. So, what happens then? Where do these nature's resources go when we fail to take care of them?
Thank you. Carol, why is it so important? What's going on?
Well, I think at the end of the day, I think, by 2050, we have a global requirement to be net zero. And the reason for that is that we need to have the, global temperatures that are under 2%, ideally at 1.5%. And for us, because, last summer was very, very warm here, wasn't it? It was, blistering. If we get to 2%, if we don't get to these numbers, I think last summer is going to feel positively cool. So this whole inertia around carbon neutral and the 2050 global requirement to meet that demand, I think is hugely important. And circular economies are, as Louise and Sam have said, they are critical along with ESG strategies, which obviously circular economies form the part of, because it's about waste and it's about that traditional chain and adding the waste and what happens to waste. And I think when businesses are committed completely to that circular economy, and ideally a closed loop circular economy, that's the imperative, and that's the action that's required to really get the sustainability, or to get climate change and the climate change under control, and to reduce significantly, enormously greenhouse emissions. So it's an absolute imperative that businesses move to circular economies. And as we've sort of said, there's loads of initiatives around what you do with waste, but fundamentally, I think of it in my way, is that in the old linear economies, you produced products, you manufactured them, you distributed them, you sold them. In a circular economy, you do all that, but you have to do it thinking about all of your sustainable practices throughout that procedure, perhaps that, but you also need to think about, when you're making product, its end of life, and initiatives then to recycle, and initiatives to repurpose. And then when it comes to its end of life, what do you then do? And that's a big responsibility now for businesses to think. It's a big shift. So sorry, I waffled on a little bit there, but it's something I feel very strong.
And yeah, you're completely right. I think, you know, as the world has the population grows and there's more people and they're buying, we just need to find ways of how we return things to people, to be able to reuse it and to create it into other products. Terry, why don't you talk us through, there's some different examples of sustainable packaging.
Yeah, well, again, I'll be glad of the thoughts of my colleagues on this, because I know that both Louise and Sam have got incredible wealth of knowledge and understanding on it. But I think it's really important to understand that through technology and innovation and new product development, sustainable packaging is a constantly moving picture. And so it's crucial that as businesses, we're keeping up to date with that. Because things are changing all the time. And I'm going to talk about a couple of examples from our own business and try and not make this as salesy as possible. But we work with high volume users of pallet wrap, for instance. And it's a good example because we're working with the bottled water industry, large chains of supermarkets, etc. The highest volume users of pallet wrap we're working with. And through high performance films and down gauging, we've managed to reduce the reliance on plastic massively. Now, in those industries, it's of utmost importance that you retain the integrity, load integrity, strength, all of that kind of thing, because this is life and death when it comes to those goods being in a truck. And just imagine that if you've got a truckload of pallets of bottled water, for instance, and each one moves by 50 mil, then you have the back wheels coming off the ground when the lorry breaks, you know, that kind of thing. And you know, it's becoming a hugely important topic. In fact, in Belgium, I haven't got the exact numbers with me. I should have got these, but in Belgium there was a frightening number of lorries stopped with unstable roads. So we realised that, you know, it's not at the expense of safety, but through our high performance IWrap films, we can deliver 40% reduction in plastic use. And I think that's really important to understand that there's hundreds of companies have looked at plastic alternatives to that application. So plastic isn't all bad, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So that's one example. We can't compromise on safety. The other one is, you know, paper-based e-commerce packaging and void fill, bubble wrap alternatives, all those kind of things. But these also raise huge debates around paper versus plastic, which I know we're going to talk about a little bit later on. And finally, on a slightly different note, one part of our business, we supply a lot of cleaning products and cleaning materials, and we know that they have to be in plastic-based products because of the nature of the goods. But we have introduced a zero waste closed loop recycling system where those empty bottles go back to be reused. So whilst there's a little bit of transport where they go back to the factory to be washed out and reused, there's less and less plastic waste happening at store and business level, which they're small steps in the right direction, I think. And I'll be interested to see what Louise and Sam have to say on this as well, because I'm sure you've got some many examples.
Yeah, do you want to add anything, Sam?
Yeah, thanks, Terry. That it's really interesting. I think one thing that stood out for me in that was that consumers often focus on the start of life of a material. So they may get excited about a plastic being made from, let's say, or a composite material being made from orange peels or something, and jump up and down and say this is a more sustainable material than its predecessor. But what they mustn't forget is, of course, the middle and end of life. So where is it made? How far is it transported until it's used? How efficient is its manufacture and use? How far does it then travel to its point of use and consumption? And then end of life. So what happens when you get rid of it? How do I recycle this paper with orange pulp in it? Does it have an effect on the fibers that are being recovered to recycle white paper en masse? So I'd say to kind of build on your point, sustainable packaging must consider start, middle, and end of life. And unfortunately, it's just a sad fact of the industry that material innovation has continued exponentially, but investment and infrastructure in recycling is way behind the curve. So, that is a fault of the industry, and one that we've been banging on about for many years. But we'll come on to, I think, some extra questions later in the debate where we talk about that exactly.
Well, actually, that's something that I wanted to ask you about, and what regulations are in place. And Terry mentioned much earlier about the government and what they're doing. But Sam, do you want to touch a bit? I know you've got some understanding on the regulations. I think it's important to cover those.
Yeah, certainly. For me, the way I look at it, there's a big line that divides all of this down the middle. You've got food packaging, where the regulations on food safety are relevant, and therefore what you can recycle and reuse in food applications is governed by that. And then there's limitations of mechanical recycling, which we'll come on to later. But just from a regulatory point of view in regards to waste, it's important to distinguish between packaging waste regulations and the plastic packaging tax, which will be coming in due course. So I can talk for a moment, because I'm not an expert on the regulations and they are very detailed, but I can talk for a moment on the packaging waste regulations. So previously, a packaging producer contributed to the cost of collection and recycling the materials it placed on the market. Now regulations have halved the previous thresholds needed for reporting, but retained the original thresholds needed for financial obligations. So basically, where you were previously asked to report your material consumption and production, those targets have halved. So now, if you are a business with an annual turnover of over £1 million, and you carry out any kind of activities with packaging, and you're responsible for over 25 tons of packaging in a calendar year, you have to report your figures. Those targets are twice as high in order for you to have to pay. So if you have an annual turnover of 2 million and you perform any kind of packaging activity, whether it's importing, exporting, or repacking, and you handle more than 50 tons of packaging, then you're actually obliged to pay extended responsibilities. Your responsibility is extended and you're obliged to pay more. So fortunately, if that blows your mind, as it does mine a bit, there are great partners out there, such as Valpak, who will guide you through the process and manage your data submissions that you must record and report to DEFRA. I've not done a very good job of explaining the intricacies of the packaging waste regulations, but Valpak definitely can. My advice would be to search the extended packaging responsibility notices, so EPR, on the gov.uk website. That helps to paint it out black and white and also get in touch with Valpak. On the other hand, we've got the plastic packaging tax. This is slightly easier to comprehend and is a tax specifically on plastic. It's discounted by weight and recycled content, aimed at reducing use, increasing recyclability, collection and recycling. So the tax applies to plastic packaging produced in or imported into the UK that does not contain at least 30% recycled plastic, and it will come in force in April 2022. If you've got materials with more than 30% recycled content, you're exempt. But if you don't, it's going to be billed at, I think, about £200 per tonne. So again, get in touch with Valpak if you're running a business and you need support with navigating this landscape of regulation, reporting, and what your obligations are.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Just even directing people in where to go, because often I think it's really hard. You know, you want to understand, and in preparing for the webinar, you know, I was looking through all the regulations, and as you said, it's very complex. And knowing that there's people around that can guide you and help you that specialize in that, you just you often don't know where to go.
Trust me, I've got Valpak on speed dial. But there are a couple of other big ones down the road as well. So the deposit return scheme is coming into Scotland in August 2023. And that requires brands to register their products if they are sold in Scotland with Circularity Scotland. And I'm actually taking a client of mine through this at the moment. It's slightly easier to understand, but it's favoured if you have, well, you get favourable rates in the deposit scheme if you have specific SKUs that you sell in Scotland versus rest of the UK. And you are slightly penalised in the scheme if you do not have specific SKUs, and instead the SKU could be sold across the UK, including Scotland. And then historically there were some others, such as the EU Plastic Packaging Directive in 2019, which was aimed to reduce packaging waste. And specifically, one of particular interest to soft drinks was Article 6 in that regulation, which requires retained bottle closures. So, you know, now I can take the cap off my sports bottle of water and your soft drinks of Coke and etc. But regulations are changing now, and you'll see that particularly Coke are tethering the caps to their bottles so they can be recycled together. That's about it.
Thank you. There is a lot. There's a lot to understand.
Those are just some of the interesting ones.
Yeah, that's really great. One of the questions that I see that comes up so much in chats, in conversations, I posted something the other day when I found some sustainable packaging, but is plastic free really plastic free? Plastic versus paper. Terry, you mentioned that before. I think it'd be really good to hear everyone's point of view actually on what their views are on plastic versus paper, or plastic, you know, should we be, you know, we can't get rid of plastic entirely for obvious reasons. But Louise, do you want to maybe start on that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think the plastic-free entire movement is really complex. And actually, just purely looking at this from a circular economy perspective, the main deal with plastic is just making sure it's valued. This concept we keep coming back to, put value on plastic, and then it stays in a loop and can be used again or repurposed. I think there's a misconception that we shouldn't put any value on plastic at all and that it's bad, but I'd encourage everyone on this webinar right now to look around you, and you'll probably find a number of things made of plastic, and that if you didn't have that thing, life would be pretty difficult. And we can't really go back to the 1940s where everything was made out of metal and glass and wood. Like it just wouldn't be possible. And the thing that we have to remember about plastic is it has so many excellent properties. And it is super low carbon. So actually that transition to that lower carbon world by 2050, that we haven't gone above 1.5 degrees warming, going to need plastic to be part of it. I've always talked about this with my clients and at my time at Innocent about how we just almost need plastic 2.0. We just need a different way of dealing with plastic and managing plastic and keeping that value in the loop. So that's my first sort of point on plastic, which I know won't be universal, but I think most people in the sustainable packaging industry will see the merits in that. But then the second point is around how we talk about plastic. So I'm saying we need plastic 2.0, but there's been a lot of talk of things that are plastic free. Well, actually, they're still plastic. What do we mean by plastic? It's so many different polymers. It's so many different applications. It can be flexible. It can be rigid. It can be so many different things. And so I remember back when the documentary came out about plastic, the Blue Planet documentary, it was just a rush of getting materials to market and calling them plastic free. And I think that's still proliferating. And actually, they are still plastic. They just are made in a different way. So that the classic example I tend to use is PLA. So it's a type of plastic. It's made from plants, but it's still molded and then ends up performing like a plastic. It's something that's clear, it's flexible, it's rigid. It will it will transport food and protect it for a long time, and all those great things we need plastic to do. So I think that's one of my perspectives on plastic, is the naming and what we call it and how we talk about it.
Thank you.
Definitely agree. Could I build on that?
Yeah, go for
So
it. I want to hear from everyone on this point.
It is a complicated issue and one which many brands are tripping up over. So when talking about materials, I'd say if it looks like plastic, feels like plastic, it is plastic. On a more serious note, EU Directive 2019/904 on single-use plastics, which was adopted in June 2019, with the aim of reducing the impact of certain plastic products on the environment, in Article 1.3, defines plastic as a material consisting of a polymer to which additives or other substances have been added to increase functionality. So using this as a guide to what a plastic is, it's quite obvious that materials claiming to be plastic free are indeed still polymers, with some made from renewable sources, such as PLA. So if we're talking about a plastic-free plastic film, let's say Natura use them on their fresh produce trays that you find in some retailers, if you go to the nice ones. And they have plastic-free packaging. They call it plastic-free, but it looks like plastic, feels like plastic, is plastic in my view. And I think the bigger issue here is we must talk about why do we still have to think about it as plastic? It's because it's difficult to get rid of at end of life. So the bigger issue with these plastic-free materials is the belief that they're better in some way than their traditional petrochemical sourced polymers. Consumers forget that they cannot be recycled with traditional polymers and are often sold as compostable, which has its own significant limitations. Currently, they are more expensive. The films are less effective as barrier materials, potentially increasing food waste, and less is known about their food contact safety. There are, of course, bio-sourced polymers, which are chemically identical to their earlier petrochemical sourced siblings. For example, bio-PET. This performs exactly the same as regular PET and can be recycled alongside it. The difference being it's not pretending to be plastic free. So my advice would be always think about start, middle, and end of life, where the materials come from, where it's going, how its value will be passed on. If you're not sure, you can speak to somebody like me who could help you navigate the challenges.
Thank you, and we appreciate you being here. Carol, did you want to?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I completely agree with both Louise and Sam again. But what I would also say, just in terms of if you look at the procurement companies that you're getting your consumables from, not from the level of knowledge that I know my esteemed colleagues have, but just from my perspective, what I would do from a layman's kind of perspective is I would just look at what their sustainability markers are. So have they, for example, committed to be single-use plastic by 2025? Have they put some timelines in their strategies around are they going to be using recyclable products, and what's their intent and by when? So a bit of a different perspective, but just kind of when you're looking at companies that perhaps you're buying from, your consumables, just do a little bit of digging into what their ESG and their strategies are saying, and are they actually putting some finite measures into usage of plastics and reducing and changing. Does that make sense?
Totally does. I'd like to hear on the other side of the question. When I started out, maybe Terry, you can help here, which is paper versus plastic. What about that? What do you think from that?
Well, I think it's important to have a balanced view on the paper versus plastic debate. And I think what the others have said is absolutely right. You know, you have to consider those three pillars: the beginning, the middle, and the end. And often, you know, I think the comment you made, Louise, was that you know, they're brilliant from a carbon. Plastics are brilliant from a carbon perspective, and everyone talks about, you know, paper uses a lot more water to produce. It's a lot heavier. It uses more energy and all those kind of things. But I don't think there's a right or wrong answer, and I think that it's upon businesses to take the advice, education, inspiration that companies are providing, like ourselves, to then make informed choices for their business. And clearly, you know, you get 6 times usage, going back to the circular economy, out of paper. It can be recycled and reused up to 6 times before it's too weak, before the fibres are too weak to reuse. So there's a lot of ways that paper can go on and on and on in our packaging economy, much more than plastic can. So there's pros and cons, there's fors and against, there's rights and wrongs, and I think that it's important to have a balanced view. Going back to Louise's point earlier, there is a book called Plastics Paradox by Chris Diarmid, and it's just a very good alternative view on plastics and kind of demything some of the things that people think about plastics. So I'm not sitting here saying that plastic's the right answer or the wrong answer, or paper's the right answer or the wrong answer. It's about actually what's right for your business, and start to consider those 3 pillars: the beginning, the middle of, and the end of life of those products. Does that help at all?
Yeah, that's great, thank you. There's a couple of questions, and you know, we've got 17 minutes left, but I think I'd really like to move the conversation towards packaging waste and recycling. There's a couple of questions that I hope we can answer in here. How much packaging is wasted? Louise, if you want to sort of come with this.
Short answer is quite a lot. But in terms of, just to answer that question completely, there's 2 main places packaging can be wasted, right up to the point of consumption and sale, and then also after it. So in the supply chain, in the build up to it, I think there's a massive opportunity to eliminate packaging waste and really adopt those circular principles of any packaging along the way that either just doesn't get used or is just obsolete, whatever that is, that could be brought back into the packaging manufacturing process. And that's going to save money anyway. So that's almost one of those classic sustainability, people, profit, planet, tick, tick, tick. So if you're not already working with zero waste packaging manufacturers, ask them why not, because it should mean you get cheaper rates. So that just shouldn't happen. And in a lot of places, it is not happening. Obviously, the majority of the waste we're talking about is once it's been sold and consumed. So I was actually looking up where we stand in the UK. We know that in Europe, we are not great. We're one of the poorer performing nations in terms of recycling, although within us, we have regionalities. Actually, Wales is the best on the planet. So it is the UK and the rest bringing them down. But UK average is that we recycle 41% of our waste. So Newport in Wales recycles 67%. And obviously, when we're talking about recycling, the vast majority of that will be packaging. The lowest performer, I don't want to name and shame, but it's Birmingham with 23%. So we've got a huge range. And one of the big challenges we've got in this country is that we've still got a decentralized approach to recycling. So we've got 365 different local authorities doing recycling different things. And there is a massive, I mean, to my knowledge, there was already agreement at the level of DEFRA to harmonise that nationally. It hasn't been rolled out, and it's likely to be combined with a move to a deposit return scheme. But yeah, as you can see, huge opportunity. And of our, you know, if we're saying 41% average, so much of our waste could be recycled. There's a lot of lost opportunity and a lot of lost value, to reiterate that point.
Yeah, I was surprised. I did a poll in the run up to this webinar about, you know, do people recycle? I mean, obviously a lot of my following is sustainability people, so but it was really high. 99% came back and said they do recycle, but there was a small percentage of that actually had to go to their recycling because their local council didn't come and pick it up. I didn't know that. I had my recycling collected, so I live in a good borough. I'm very lucky. Does anyone have anything to add on the wasted packaging, Sam?
Yeah, absolutely. As I said earlier, recycling technology is far behind the curve of material innovation. And the only type of recycling performed on scale in the UK is what's called mechanical recycling. Materials are collected, sorted by size, shape, density, and color, and then ground up, cleaned, melted, and remolded, ready for the next life. This is an oversimplification, and as ever, the devil is in the detail and goes hand in hand with food safety. So broadly speaking, there are 6 main materials collected post-consumer for recycling. These are aluminium, glass, PET, so like this bottle of water, HDPE, like your cleaning chemicals and your bathroom bottles, and milk bottles, paper. Of these, only 4 are allowed to be reused in packaging that comes in direct contact with food. These are glass, aluminium, PET, and HDPE, but only if the HDPE being put back in contact with food started its life as a milk bottle. So already you can see it's a lossy process. We're not recovering and reusing to the full extent all of the materials. PET only becomes another drinks bottle if it was clear to start with. That's why major brands like 7up and Oasis moved out of coloured PET. So thinking back earlier to our conversation about material value, by doing so, they've increased the value of that material, making it more attractive to collection, more attractive to recycling, more attractive to reprocessors, more attractive to brands who want to increase the recycled content of their drinks and save 30% tax. So PET gets reused, if it is coloured, PET will get reused into textiles, or coloured again, made black and used in, let's say, IT industry moulded components. HDPE, by contrast, that wasn't a milk bottle, so that's all of your household and bathroom bottles and sprays, etc., can't be sorted on a commercially viable scale, can't be made into different things, and will most likely end up going into incineration and energy recovery. So a great loss of material value. And it can't be reused in materials that go in contact for food because of the risk of the chemical contamination that came along with its primary use. So you see the limitations of mechanical recycling are quite great. The alternative is chemical recycling, which can essentially eat up any material into its original monomers. So taking a polymer, breaking it down into a monomer, and it produces a sort of oil that can be poured directly into the start of the process again. So that's a simplified explanation of chemical recycling, but it doesn't face the same challenges and limitations that mechanical does. This technology is less common, more expensive, but has the possibility of being transportable, modular, and installed in remote destinations, for example, to clean up plastic pollution that EU countries have exported to poorer countries around the world, and not because of their advanced recycling capabilities. So there we see mechanical recycling, archaic, lossy is a lossy process, but we do see feedstocks and and materials increasing in their value as they become simpler and therefore more attractive. But I really think that technology needs to support chemical recycling and advances in that industry in order to complement and to capture everything else that isn't a premium glass, metal can, clear PET bottle or a milk bottle.
Thank you. There's been some stories over the last few years about recycled materials, and they're actually ending up in landfills over the other side of the world. And we've seen some brands that, you know, commit to recycling and sustainability, and those brands have been really apparent in those landfills. How do you stop that? Where do recycled materials go? You know, you put your things in the recycling and you hope that it's going back to another product in the circular economy. But Carol, where do those recycled materials go to?
Yeah, well, I sort of work a volunteer actually for my local charity shop, and obviously charity is in the main selling secondhand goods, which is obviously in itself very recyclable. But in terms then of what happens to the goods that aren't sold and they go to landfill, I think it's sort of different local councils, as the panelists have said, have different responsibilities. So you could give something to charity, it doesn't sell, it still ends up in landfill and on some shore in Africa. So I think there's a whole thing about recycling companies. The charity that I work with uses a company that 100%, when they take the goods from the stores that you haven't sold, you can track what they've done with it. So I think I'm referring to clothing, but I suppose the same applies with everything. It's the questioning. I was at my local recycle last week, and I said to the guys there, well, what happens here? Just for the guys that work there, where do you take it? Is it sustainable? And they said, well, we're moving towards more sustainable ways. And I just thought, well, they don't really know. So I think it's just to really engage if you're with your councils and find out what. And if you're going to be recycling, then associate and affiliate yourselves with those types of companies that are solely committed to taking that recycled product and recycling it sustainably. And I think that's a whole different webinar, isn't it? But that's sort of that's kind of that's my view, really. I think it's a very challenging situation, because we go down to recycling points if you do recycle like that. And I think for a lot of people, there's an automatic assumption that it's recycled, it's sustainable, but that's not entirely the end of the story, as we all know.
Thank you. Just as we're coming to the, oh, sorry, Terry, did you want to add something there?
Just one really quick point. I'm quite opinionated on this, and I believe that we all have a duty to do more. And I think that there's a lot of emphasis put on businesses to do more. But I think actually, personally, we all have to do more and pledge more to do more in terms of recycling. And it was just a small story, really. I was up at Edinburgh Airport last week, and a lady came along and she had a salad or a fruit pot, and she was putting the spoon in the right bin, and then there wasn't one for the pot. It wasn't clear where she should put it, and so it just went into the general waste bin. And I just felt, I actually watched her do that, and she went up with made a conscious effort to do the responsible thing, and it wasn't made easy for her. So I think there's also a duty on local authorities and governments to make it easier for people to recycle and to carry out their responsibilities. But that's my opinion.
Yeah, and I think you're right. And we can't wait for the governments to do everything, and we can't be completely dependent on the stores. It's everyone's responsibility, whether you're the consumer, whether you're the store, whether you're the manufacturer. Like, if everybody started making more conscious choices, then we'd be in a better place. What about, we've got a few minutes left, and Terry, I have got a question for you, which is about, a lot of people say, but it's so much more expensive. Can you talk about the price when it comes to sustainable packaging? Is it more expensive?
Well, again, it's a very broad question because of the infinitude of different packaging choices. But quite honestly, in our opinion, it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to cost more money. That's very broad, and that's out in our opinion. Just going back to what I was talking about earlier, our IRAP high performance pallet films and how we reduce plastics. We can reduce plastic usage and waste by about 40%. So clearly, that's reducing the amount of plastic that has to be made. It's reducing the amount of plastic that has to be transported, and then the amount of plastic that's being used. So there's 3 ways straight away that you're reducing cost. But we're very pragmatic about it. In that particular example, we actually measure the cost of each pallet wrapped. So there's lots of misinformation out there. There's lots of misleading information out there about the cost of products, and our product is the cheapest on the market. But actually, you've got to get to the core of what you're using and saying actually the cost per pallet wrapped is X pence, and that's where you clearly see a use. And then making sure that, I think it's really important that we make sure that businesses remain at best practice. So it's not about just going out and doing an audit and telling them what's possible, but helping businesses to achieve best practice. In its like-for-like raw state, paper products will always be more expensive than plastic. But I think it's important to look at the holistic view. I think one of the speakers earlier one of my colleagues spoke about making sure that things are more efficient. So I think you have to have a kind of a 360 view on it. That's not altogether the full answer, I guess. We were working with a national charity who sells a lot of products through their e-commerce channels, and we did a lot of work with them on their primary packaging around making sure the goods get there, and by implementing a paper product which actually in itself costs more money, they actually reduced the number of breakages and also sped up their packing process. So it had a positive impact at the other end. So it's not an easy one to answer, and I guess there's a straight answer. In some cases, yes, but mostly if you have a balanced view, there's ways of offsetting that, and it can be very attractive. Regarding what the others might say, though.
That's great, and I think it's that sort of looking at it from beginning to end rather than just the actual price of it. And we have actually only got a few minutes left, and I like to leave the last question just to go round to all of the panelists and just give your one big tip takeaway from this conversation. Louise, we will start with you, if that's okay.
I think your starting point, if you handle packaging, if you make packaging as part of your business, just take a step back and have a little go at working out your own sustainable packaging strategy and base that on the circular principles of reduce, reuse, recycle.
And Carol?
I would say that following on from Terry's just previous point, that within this whole thing, we all have a part to play. So in terms of just our own individual practices, we should just ensure that we all look to our own, so that we start, because that's when things start to really happen, is when the masses take. So from today, if we could all just make one new pledge around how we were as individuals going to use less.
Sam?
I think Lou's advice, reduce, reuse, recycle, it's been said time and time again, and it's an old phrase, but it really does simplify it down to 3 easy steps. One thing I would add would be, bear in mind, think about material value through that, and choose materials which have value to collectors and to the recycling industry. So in doing so, use simple materials, avoid multi-layer complex materials, in order to preserve the value of them, so that somebody else will have an interest, pay to collect it, pay to recycle it, pay to reuse it. So reduce, reuse, recycle, use simple materials and preserve their value, and thinking about where they go at their end of life. How will it be collected or recycled?
Thank you. And finally, Terry.
I said mine already, really, but I just think we all need to do something. Don't do nothing. Do something, and we all have a responsibility. More than happy to talk to anybody who wants to reach out to me, and it's been really great to be part of this event. Thank you. Sam.
Thank you, and thank you for your support in letting us run this event at Copia. Thank you for everyone that stayed all the way through. We really appreciate that. Thank you to the panelists, Louise, Sam, Carol, Terry, and from me, Sam from Responsible Futures. It'd be great to connect with any of you, and thank you so much for joining us. I hope you all enjoyed that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.